The morning sun barely crested the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains when Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison received the encrypted message that would change everything. His SEAL Team's 6th Unit had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan's Khost Province for 3 months, conducting high-value target elimination missions deep in Taliban territory. The intelligence was solid this time. A senior Taliban commander named Abdul Rashid had been tracked to a compound in the remote village of Kargoi, approximately 40 kilometers southeast of their position. Morrison gathered his 6-man team in the briefing room at 0400 hours. The concrete walls were lined with tactical maps, satellite imagery, and communication equipment that hummed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness. Staff Sergeant Carlos Viper Rodriguez, the team's designated marksman, studied the aerial photographs while cleaning his Barrett M82 A1 sniper rifle with methodical precision. Petty Officer First Class Michael Tank Williams, their heavy weapons specialist, examined the route on his tablet, marking potential choke points and escape routes. The rest of the team, communications specialist Danny Park, demolitions expert Tommy Boom O'Brien, medic Sean Kelly, and point man Jake Rabbit Thompson, listened intently as Morrison outlined their mission parameters. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep ridgelines, creating a natural bowl that offered both protection and potential entrapment. Intelligence suggested that Rashid was meeting with 2 other high-value targets to coordinate upcoming attacks against NATO supply convoys. The meeting was scheduled for that evening, giving the team a narrow window of opportunity. Their insertion would be via helicopter at a landing zone approximately 6 kilometers from the target, allowing them to approach on foot under cover of darkness. Morrison emphasized the importance of stealth and precision. They would establish overwatch positions on the surrounding ridges before moving in for the capture operation. The rules of engagement were clear: capture if possible, eliminate if necessary. Civilian casualties were to be avoided at all costs, as the village housed approximately 200 non-combatants, including women and children. The operation had been designated Blackwater 7, and they had a 12-hour window before extraction helicopters would arrive at the designated pickup zone. As the team conducted their final equipment checks, Rodriguez felt an unusual tension in the air. His instincts, honed through 4 combat deployments and countless successful missions, were sending warning signals that he couldn't quite identify. The weather forecast showed clear skies with minimal wind, perfect conditions for long-range shooting, but something felt off about the intelligence package. The information had come from a single source, a local informant whose reliability rating was questionable at best. However, the potential value of capturing or eliminating 3 high-value targets simultaneously outweighed the risks in the minds of command. The team loaded into 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters at 1800 hours, their faces painted with camouflage and night vision goggles secured to their helmets. The flight path would take them through a series of valleys to avoid Taliban observation posts and potential surface-to-air missile threats. Morrison reviewed the mission timeline one final time as the helicopters lifted off into the dusky evening sky. Phase 1 would involve insertion and movement to target. Phase 2 called for establishing overwatch and conducting reconnaissance. Phase 3 was the actual assault on the compound. Phase 4 involved extraction with either prisoners or confirmed eliminations. The landscape below them transformed from the relative safety of the forward operating base to increasingly hostile territory as they flew deeper into Taliban-controlled areas. The pilots maintained radio silence, except for essential navigation communications, flying at minimal altitude to avoid radar detection. Rodriguez checked his equipment one more time, ensuring his rifle scope was properly zeroed and his backup ammunition was easily accessible. His role would be crucial during the Overwatch phase, providing precision fire support and protecting the assault team from elevated threats. As they approached the landing zone, the helicopter crews conducted final threat assessments using thermal imaging and electronic surveillance equipment. The area appeared clear of enemy activity, but the team knew that Taliban fighters were experts at concealment and could remain undetected until the moment of contact. The lead pilot held up 5 fingers, indicating 5 minutes to insertion. Each team member performed final communications checks and weapons safety procedures. The helicopters touched down briefly in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, disgorging the 6 SEALs who immediately formed a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. Within 30 seconds, the aircraft were airborne again, disappearing into the darkness and leaving the team alone in hostile territory. Morrison activated his GPS navigation system and confirmed their position. They were exactly where they needed to be, but now the real danger began. The team moved out in single file, with Thompson taking point and scanning for improvised explosive devices and enemy positions. The terrain was rocky and unforgiving, with loose scree that could create noise and potentially reveal their position to enemy sentries. Rodriguez brought up the rear, constantly scanning their backtrail for signs of pursuit while maintaining visual contact with the rest of the team. The march to their objective would take approximately 2 hours through some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan, where every shadow could conceal an enemy fighter and every sound could trigger an ambush. The team had been moving through the mountainous terrain for 90 minutes when Thompson raised his fist, signaling an immediate halt. Through his night vision goggles, he had spotted movement approximately 300 meters ahead, near a shepherd's hut that wasn't marked on their intelligence maps. Morrison crawled forward to Thompson's position, studying the structure through his own enhanced optics. 2 figures were visible outside the hut, and the faint glow of cigarettes revealed they were likely sentries posted to watch the approaches to the valley. Rodriguez moved to an elevated position among a cluster of boulders, establishing a hasty firing position with clear lines of sight to the suspected enemy positions. His rifle was equipped with a suppressor and subsonic ammunition, allowing for silent elimination if necessary. Through his high-powered scope, he could clearly identify the sentries as Taliban fighters carrying AK-47 assault rifles and handheld radios. Their positioning suggested a larger defensive network than intelligence had indicated, raising concerns about the accuracy of their mission briefing. Morrison made the tactical decision to bypass the sentry position rather than engage, as gunfire could alert the entire area to their presence. The team would need to add an additional kilometer to their route, moving along a ridgeline that would provide better concealment, but also expose them to potential observation from multiple directions. Park established communications with their headquarters, transmitting a brief situation report using encrypted burst communications that lasted less than 3 seconds. The detour took them through a series of narrow ravines carved by centuries of snowmelt and seasonal flooding. The rocky terrain was treacherous in the darkness, requiring each team member to move slowly and deliberately to avoid creating noise or triggering rock slides. Williams, carrying the heaviest load with his machine gun and extra ammunition, struggled with the challenging footing but maintained pace through sheer determination and conditioning. As they navigated around the enemy position, Kelly noticed disturbing signs that suggested increased Taliban activity in the area. Fresh vehicle tracks were visible in the sandy soil of a dry creek bed, and several firing positions have been recently constructed using sandbags and wooden pallets. The evidence pointed to a much larger enemy presence than their intelligence had suggested, but the mission continued according to plan despite the mounting concerns. The team reached their planned observation point overlooking the target compound at 2,130 hours, 30 minutes behind schedule, but still within acceptable parameters. The compound consisted of 3 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard, surrounded by a 7-foot mud brick wall with a single gate on the eastern side. Morrison and Thompson conducted detailed reconnaissance using thermal imaging equipment, identifying at least 12 heat signatures within the compound boundaries. The numbers were concerning. Their intelligence had suggested no more than 6 individuals would be present. Rodriguez established his primary sniper position on a rocky outcrop approximately 800 meters from the compound, with clear sight lines to all 3 buildings and the courtyard area. His backup position was located 200 meters to the north, accessible through a concealed approach that would allow repositioning if his primary location was compromised. He began range-finding key positions within the compound, noting wind conditions and atmospheric factors that could affect bullet trajectory during precision shots. The team observed the compound for 2 hours, documenting patterns of movement and identifying potential high-value targets. Through intercepted radio communications, Park confirmed that their primary target, Abdul Rashid, was indeed present and scheduled to meet with other Taliban commanders at midnight. However, the increased security presence suggested that someone might have compromised their mission or that the Taliban were expecting trouble. At 2,300 hours, 3 additional vehicles arrived at the compound, carrying what appeared to be senior Taliban leadership based on the security protocols observed. Morrison counted at least 20 armed fighters now present in and around the compound, significantly more than the 6 to 8 individuals their mission planning had anticipated. The team faced a difficult decision: abort the mission due to overwhelming enemy numbers, or proceed with the understanding that they would be severely outnumbered. Rodriguez reported his observations to Morrison through their tactical communication system. From his elevated position, he had identified at least 4 heavy machine gun positions and 2 possible mortar crews within the compound. The Taliban fighters were well-armed and appeared to be experienced combatants rather than the typical militia forces they usually encountered. Several individuals were carrying rocket-propelled grenades and advanced communication equipment that suggested coordination with external command elements. Morrison evaluated their tactical options while maintaining constant surveillance of the compound. The original plan called for a direct assault supported by precision sniper fire, but the increased enemy presence made such an approach potentially suicidal. Alternative approaches included calling for air support, requesting additional ground forces, or attempting to isolate and capture individual targets as they departed the compound. The decision was made more urgent by intercepted communications indicating that the Taliban meeting was concluding earlier than expected. Park reported that the enemy fighters were discussing departure times and routes, suggesting that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. If they were going to act, it would have to be within the next 30 minutes before the targets dispersed to different locations throughout the region. As Morrison weighed their options, Rodriguez maintained his watch through the rifle scope, studying the compound layout and identifying potential shooting positions if the mission proceeded. His primary targets would be the heavy weapons crews and any individuals who appear to be directing the defensive efforts. The range was well within his capabilities, but the sheer number of enemy fighters meant that surprise and precision would be absolutely critical for survival. The team prepared for what was beginning to look like an increasingly dangerous operation, with each member checking equipment and reviewing contingency plans. Their extraction helicopters would not arrive for another 8 hours, meaning they would need to survive in hostile territory regardless of how the next phase of the mission developed. The mountains around them seemed to close in as they realized they might have walked into a carefully prepared trap. At 2,340 hours, everything went wrong simultaneously. Park's radio equipment suddenly erupted with Taliban communications on multiple frequencies, indicating that their position had been compromised and enemy forces were moving to surround them. Morrison's worst fears were confirmed when muzzle flashes appeared on ridgelines to their north, south, and east. They had walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush that had been planned specifically for their arrival. The first enemy fire came from a heavy machine gun position approximately 400 meters to their northeast, sending tracers streaking through the darkness toward their observation post. Williams immediately returned fire with his M249 squad automatic weapon, laying down suppressive fire while the rest of the team sought cover behind the rocky terrain. Rodriguez remained in his sniper position, calmly acquiring targets through his scope despite the chaos erupting around him. Thompson and Kelly moved to establish a defensive perimeter on the southern approach, where additional Taliban fighters were attempting to advance up the hillside under cover of rocket-propelled grenade fire. The explosions sent rock fragments and debris flying through the air, creating a deadly environment where every second of exposure could be fatal. O'Brien began preparing demolition charges to block potential enemy advance routes, while Morrison coordinated their defensive efforts through tactical communications. The Taliban attack was executed with military precision that surprised the American team. Enemy fighters moved in coordinated bounds, using suppressive fire and tactical movement techniques that suggested professional military training rather than typical guerrilla tactics. Radio intercepts revealed that they were being commanded by a former Afghan army officer who had detailed knowledge of American special operations procedures and equipment capabilities. Rodriguez engaged his first target at 2,344 hours, a Taliban fighter attempting to set up a mortar position on the eastern ridgeline. The suppressed rifle shot traveled 820 meters before striking the enemy combatant center mass, eliminating the mortar threat before it could be brought into action. His second shot came 30 seconds later, targeting the machine gunner who was directing the heaviest fire against their position. The precision shooting temporarily reduced enemy fire volume, allowing the team to reposition to more defensible terrain. The enemy force was estimated at more than 60 fighters positioned in multiple locations surrounding the SEAL team's observation post. They had clearly been expecting American forces and had prepared ambush positions with overlapping fields of fire that created a deadly crossfire zone. Morrison realized that their intelligence source had likely been a double agent working for the Taliban, providing enemy forces with detailed information about American tactics and timing. Williams found himself engaged in a firefight with enemy fighters attempting to advance from a dry creek bed to the northwest. His machine gun provided crucial suppressive fire, but ammunition expenditure was becoming a critical concern. Each team member carried limited ammunition loads optimized for a quick strike mission, not an extended firefight against overwhelming enemy numbers. Kelly moved between team members, redistributing ammunition and treating minor wounds caused by rock fragments and near-miss bullet impacts. Park managed to establish contact with their headquarters despite heavy interference from Taliban electronic warfare equipment. His transmission was brief, but clear. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and requesting immediate close air support and emergency extraction. The response was not encouraging. The nearest attack aircraft were more than 90 minutes away, and helicopter extraction was impossible until the enemy forces could be neutralized or suppressed. O'Brien successfully detonated his first demolition charge, bringing down a rock slide that blocked the primary enemy approach route from the south. However, this action also revealed their defensive positions to enemy observers, resulting in increased mortar fire that began landing dangerously close to their location. The Taliban forces were clearly well supplied with ammunition and heavy weapons, suggesting this ambush had been planned for weeks or possibly months. Rodriguez continued his precision shooting, methodically targeting enemy leaders and heavy weapons crews that posed the greatest threat to team survival. His third confirmed elimination was an enemy commander who had been directing fire from a prominent position on the northern ridgeline. The shot required compensation for wind drift and elevation differences, but Rodriguez's experience and training allowed him to make the difficult shot under extreme pressure. The tactical situation continued to deteriorate as enemy fighters began advancing under cover of smoke grenades and intense suppressive fire. Morrison made the difficult decision to begin withdrawing toward their alternate extraction point, a clearing approximately 2 kilometers to the west where helicopters might be able to land if air support could suppress enemy forces. The movement would be extremely dangerous, requiring the team to break contact while under fire and traverse open terrain that offered minimal cover. Thompson took point for the withdrawal movement, using night vision equipment to identify the safest route through the rocky terrain while avoiding known enemy positions. The team moved in bounds, with half the members providing covering fire while the others advanced to the next offensive position. Rodriguez provided overwatch for the entire movement, engaging targets of opportunity while protecting the team's flanks from his elevated position. The Taliban forces pursued aggressively, using mortars and rocket-propelled grenades to maintain pressure on the withdrawing Americans. Several near-miss explosions caused temporary hearing loss and disorientation, but the team's training and cohesion allowed them to maintain tactical discipline despite the overwhelming stress of the situation. Kelly treated Thompson for shrapnel wounds to his left arm, applying field dressings while continuing to move toward their extraction point. As they reached the halfway point of their withdrawal route, Morrison received devastating news through Park's radio communications. Their alternate extraction site was also under enemy observation, with Taliban forces positioned to interdict any rescue helicopters that might attempt to land. The enemy had clearly anticipated their contingency plans and positioned forces to counter every potential escape route. The SEAL team found themselves trapped in an increasingly desperate situation, surrounded by superior enemy forces with limited ammunition and no immediate prospect of rescue or reinforcement. Their only advantage was Rodriguez's precision shooting ability and the team's superior training and equipment, but these factors were rapidly being overwhelmed by the sheer number of enemy fighters and the sophistication of the Taliban ambush. By 01:30 hours, the situation had become critical. The team had been fighting continuously for nearly 2 hours, and their ammunition supplies were approaching dangerously low levels. Williams was down to his last belt of machine gun ammunition, while Thompson and Kelly had fewer than 60 rounds remaining for their assault rifles. Morrison calculated that they had perhaps 30 minutes of sustained fighting capability before being forced to rely on pistols and hand-to-hand combat. The Taliban forces had demonstrated remarkable persistence and tactical coordination, maintaining constant pressure while systematically closing the encirclement around the trapped Americans. Enemy mortar fire had become increasingly accurate, with several rounds landing within 20 meters of their defensive positions. Rodriguez counted at least 8 separate enemy positions still actively engaging them, despite his successful elimination of multiple high-value targets throughout the firefight. Park's communications equipment had been damaged by shrapnel from a near-miss rocket-propelled grenade explosion, leaving them with limited ability to coordinate with outside support elements. His backup radio was functional, but had reduced range and clarity, making communication with headquarters intermittent and unreliable. The team was essentially on their own until air support could arrive, if it could penetrate the Taliban air defense network that appeared to include shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles. Morrison made the tactical decision to consolidate their defensive perimeter into a smaller area that could be more effectively defended with their remaining ammunition. The team occupied a cluster of large boulders that provided protection from most directions, but also limited their mobility and escape options. O'Brien prepared his remaining demolition charges for use as improvised defensive weapons, creating a final line of protection if enemy forces managed to breach their perimeter. Rodriguez had expended more than half of his precision ammunition, but continued to engage high-priority targets with devastating effectiveness. His fourth confirmed elimination was a Taliban fighter operating an 82mm recoilless rifle that posed a significant threat to their defensive position. The shot was made at maximum effective range under difficult lighting conditions, requiring exceptional skill and steady nerves under extreme stress. The enemy forces began employing new tactics as dawn approached, using smoke and mirrors to create false targets while advancing actual fighters through concealed routes. Several Taliban fighters had managed to infiltrate within 100 meters of the SEAL position, close enough to throw hand grenades and prepare for a final assault. Williams engaged these close-range threats with his remaining machine gun ammunition, creating a deadly zone that temporarily halted the enemy advance. Kelly had been treating minor wounds throughout the engagement, but now faced more serious casualties as enemy fire became more accurate and concentrated. Thompson had sustained a significant laceration to his left leg from rock fragments, while O'Brien was suffering from a concussion caused by a nearby mortar explosion. Despite these injuries, both men continued to fight effectively, demonstrating the extraordinary resilience and determination of elite Special Operations Forces. At 0200 hours, the team received their first piece of encouraging news when Park managed to establish contact with an AC 130 gunship that was approaching their area of operations. The aircraft was still 40 minutes away from being in position to provide fire support, but its powerful sensors and weapons systems would be capable of neutralizing the Taliban position surrounding the SEAL team. However, 40 minutes was an eternity in their current tactical situation. Morrison realized that survival for the next 40 minutes would require extraordinary measures and possibly heroic sacrifices by individual team members. He began developing contingency plans for covering the withdrawal of wounded team members while maintaining defensive fire against overwhelming enemy numbers. The mathematics of their situation were stark. They were outnumbered at least 10-1, with diminishing ammunition and no immediate prospect of reinforcement. Rodriguez observed enemy preparations for what appeared to be a coordinated final assault on their position. Through his scope, he could see Taliban fighters massing in 3 separate locations, indicating a simultaneous attack from multiple directions designed to overwhelm their defensive capabilities. He estimated that the enemy would begin their assault within the next 15 minutes, timing their attack to occur during the darkest period before dawn. The team prepared for what might be their final stand, with each member checking weapons, redistributing remaining ammunition, and reviewing hand-to-hand combat techniques that might be necessary if their firearms became ineffective. Morrison reminded his team of their training and the countless successful missions they had completed together, emphasizing that their survival depended on maintaining tactical discipline and mutual support even under impossible circumstances. Williams positioned his machine gun to cover the most likely enemy approach route, while Thompson and Kelly established overlapping fields of fire to protect the team's flanks. O'Brien armed his remaining demolition charges and prepared to detonate them manually if enemy forces breached their immediate perimeter. Park continued attempting to establish communications with the approaching gunship, providing target coordinates and friendly position information that would be crucial for effective close air support. Rodriguez made a critical observation through his rifle scope that changed their tactical situation. He identified what appeared to be the enemy commander's position on a prominent ridgeline approximately 900 meters from their location. The individual was directing Taliban movements through hand signals and radio communications, coordinating the final assault preparations. Eliminating this target might disrupt enemy coordination and buy precious time for the team's survival. The shot would be extremely challenging due to the range, lighting conditions, and the fact that the target was partially concealed behind rock formations. Rodriguez would have only one opportunity to engage before enemy return fire forced him to abandon his position. Success could potentially save his team's lives, while failure might result in his own death and leave the team without their most effective long-range capability. As enemy forces began their final approach movements, Rodriguez prepared for the most important shot of his career. The wind had shifted slightly, requiring last-minute adjustments to his scope settings. His breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm as he acquired his target through the crosshairs. Everything depended on the next few seconds and his ability to place a precision shot under impossible conditions. At 0215 hours, Rodriguez steadied his breathing and acquired a perfect sight picture on the Taliban commander who was coordinating the final assault against his teammates. The target was partially exposed behind a rock formation, presenting a narrow window of opportunity that measured less than 8 inches in width. Wind conditions had stabilized at approximately 5 miles per hour from the northwest, requiring minimal compensation at the 900-meter range. Rodriguez applied steady pressure to the trigger, following the precise technique that had been drilled into him through thousands of hours of training and multiple combat deployments. The rifle fired with a suppressed crack that was barely audible above the ongoing battle sounds. The bullet traveled for nearly 1 full second before impact, during which Rodriguez maintained perfect sight alignment and followed through with his shooting fundamentals. The shot struck the Taliban commander's center mass, eliminating him instantly and causing immediate confusion among the enemy forces who had been receiving tactical direction from his position. Radio communications between Taliban units became disorganized, and contradictory as subordinate leaders attempted to assume command responsibilities without clear coordination or knowledge of the overall battle plan. The psychological impact of losing their commander was devastating to Taliban morale, particularly because the shot had come from an impossible range under extremely difficult conditions. Enemy fighters began questioning whether American reinforcements had arrived or if they were facing a larger force than originally anticipated. Several Taliban units began withdrawing from their advanced positions, creating gaps in the encirclement that Morrison immediately recognized as potential escape routes. Morrison ordered an immediate tactical withdrawal toward the northwest, where enemy positions appeared to be weakening following the loss of central command and control. Thompson led the movement despite his leg wound, using night vision equipment to navigate through rocky terrain that provided concealment from enemy observation. Williams provided covering fire with his remaining ammunition while the team displaced from their defensive position. Rodriguez remained in overwatch position for an additional 5 minutes, engaging targets of opportunity and protecting the team's withdrawal route. His precision shooting continued to disrupt Taliban tactical coordination, eliminating 3 additional fighters who were attempting to rally their units and restore offensive momentum. Each successful shot further degraded enemy confidence and combat effectiveness during the critical withdrawal phase. The team's movement toward extraction coordinates was aided by increasing confusion among Taliban forces, many of whom were now focused on locating and eliminating the sniper who had demonstrated such devastating long-range capability. Rodriguez's reputation among local Taliban fighters was already legendary from previous missions, and his presence on the battlefield had become a significant psychological weapon that multiplied his tactical effectiveness. Park successfully re-established communications with the incoming AC-130 gunship and provided updated target coordinates for enemy positions that continued to threaten the SEAL team's withdrawal. The aircraft's powerful sensor systems began tracking Taliban fighters and preparing for precision engagement with 40mm cannons and 105mm howitzers that would neutralize remaining threats around the extraction site. At 0245 hours, the first AC-130 gunfire began impacting Taliban positions with devastating accuracy. The psychological effect was immediate and overwhelming as enemy forces found themselves under attack by weapon systems they could not see or effectively engage. Many Taliban fighters abandoned their positions and retreated deeper into the mountains, while others sought cover in caves and protected positions that offered some protection from aerial observation. Rodriguez began his own withdrawal from the sniper position, moving carefully through terrain that was now illuminated by fires caused by the gunship's precision strikes. His movement route took him through areas where Taliban forces might still be present, requiring constant vigilance and readiness for close-range combat. He carried his rifle and essential equipment while leaving non-critical gear behind to increase mobility. The team successfully linked up at a rally point approximately 800 meters from their original position, with all members present and accounted for despite various wounds and equipment damage sustained during the prolonged firefight. Morrison conducted a rapid casualty assessment and determined that everyone was capable of continued movement to the extraction site, although Thompson's leg wound would require medical evacuation and treatment. Kelly provided field medical treatment for the most serious injuries while the team prepared for the final movement to their extraction landing zone. O'Brien destroyed sensitive equipment that could not be carried, using thermite grenades to ensure complete destruction of communications devices and tactical computers that might provide intelligence value to enemy forces. The AC-130 gunship continued to provide close air support, systematically destroying Taliban positions and preventing enemy forces from interfering with the extraction operation. The aircraft's thermal imaging systems tracked retreating Taliban fighters and engaged those who posed continued threats to American forces or civilian populations in the surrounding area. At 0330 hours, 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters arrived at the extraction site under protection of the orbiting gunship and additional fighter aircraft that had been diverted to support the rescue operation. The landing zone had been secured through precision airstrikes that eliminated remaining Taliban forces in the immediate area, allowing for a safe extraction of the SEAL team. Rodriguez was the last team member to board the extraction helicopter, maintaining Overwatch security until all his teammates were safely aboard the aircraft. His precision shooting throughout the mission had been instrumental in the team's survival, accounting for 7 confirmed eliminations of high-value targets and disrupting enemy tactical coordination at critical moments during the firefight. The helicopter flight back to forward operating base Chapman took 45 minutes, during which the team received initial medical treatment and debriefing from intelligence officers who accompanied the rescue mission. Rodriguez cleaned and secured his rifle while reflecting on the mission and the critical shot that had saved his teammates' lives during their most desperate moment. Morrison later learned that the mission had been compromised by a double agent who had provided detailed information to Taliban forces about American tactics and timing. The intelligence failure had nearly resulted in the loss of an entire SEAL team, but the exceptional training, teamwork, and individual heroism demonstrated by Rodriguez and his teammates had overcome overwhelming odds through skill, determination, and precise marksmanship under impossible conditions. The Taliban commander eliminated by Rodriguez's critical shot was later identified as a former Afghan army colonel who had been responsible for planning multiple successful ambushes against NATO forces. His death significantly disrupted Taliban operational capabilities in the region and demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of American Special Operations Forces even when facing overwhelming numerical disadvantages and tactical surprise.